Inside a bustling downtown restaurant, a young waitress named Emily tries to hold back her tears as the arrogant manager ridicules her in front of customers for a small mistake. His words cut deep, echoing across the room while people pretend not to notice. She clutches her notepad tightly, wishing the ground would swallow her whole. In the corner, a sharply dressed man in silence observes everything, his eyes narrowing, not at Emily, but at the cruelty of the manager. The lunch rush had just begun. The clatter of silverware and the low hum of conversation filled the air of Harper's Grill, one of downtown Chicago's busiest spots. Sunlight poured through tall glass windows, bouncing off polished tables where businessmen loosened their ties and students laughed over fries. And in the middle of it all stood Emily, a 22-year-old waitress with tired eyes and calloused hands. She moved quickly between tables, balancing plates and polite smiles. But today, just one mistake was enough to break her. The order had been wrong. A burger came without cheese. A soda instead of iced tea. Harmless, really. But to Mr. Dalton, the manager, it was a chance to remind everyone who held the power. He stormed toward her, voice booming across the restaurant. "Emily, again? How many times do I have to say it? Customers don't pay for your mistakes." Every head turned. Forks froze halfway to mouths. Emily's cheeks burned as the words cut into her. She muttered, "I'm sorry, sir, it won't happen again," clutching her notepad so tightly her knuckles turned white. Dalton sneered. "You said that last week? Maybe this job's too much for you." The restaurant fell silent. A couple of businessmen looked down at their plates. A mother whispered to her child to keep eating. No one spoke. No one defended her. Emily lowered her head. All she wanted was to disappear. But in the far corner of the room someone was watching. A man in a dark tailored suit, broad-shouldered, with slicked-back hair and an expensive watch glinting under the light. He hadn't touched his meal. His eyes stayed locked on Dalton, unblinking, cold, not at Emily's mistake, but at the cruelty in how she was being treated. Emily's hands trembled as she picked up the wrong plate, her breath shaky. She whispered an apology to the customer, forcing a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Dalton leaned closer, his voice low but venomous. "People like you should be grateful to even have a job here." Those words, "people like you," they echoed louder than the clinking dishes, louder than the laughter in the booths, class, status. A reminder she was small, replaceable, disposable. Her throat tightened. She blinked fast, refusing to let tears fall where the whole world could see. From the corner, the suited man leaned back in his chair, a faint smirk tugging at his lips. Not of amusement, but of something else. Calculation. He slowly lifted his glass, swirling the dark red wine. And as the glass caught the light, his eyes met Dalton's for the briefest moment. Dalton didn't notice, but Emily did. And in that silent exchange, a new tension filled the air, like the promise of a storm that hadn't yet broken. The restaurant returned to its rhythm. Forks clinked, voices rose again, but nothing felt the same, because someone had been watching. And Emily's humiliation was no longer just hers to carry. The break room was dim, lit only by a buzzing fluorescent bulb that flickered as if it might give out at any moment. Emily sat on the edge of a cracked vinyl chair, elbows on her knees, face buried in her hands. Dalton's words still echoed in her mind. "People like you should be grateful to even have a job here." She whispered the words to herself, as though saying them out loud would dull the sting. But it didn't. They cut deeper. Her hands shook. On the tiny table beside her sat a folded bill from the utility company, slipped into her apron earlier that morning. Past due. Again. And in her phone, a text from the hospital about her mother's medication refill. Urgent. Unpaid. Life had not left her much room to breathe. And today, humiliation had joined the weight. A single tear escaped, tracing down her cheek. She wiped it away quickly, almost angrily. She couldn't afford weakness. Not here. Not now. From outside the door, the muffled sounds of laughter and clinking glasses reminded her the world kept moving, even as hers felt like it was standing still. With a deep breath, Emily stood, smoothed her apron, and looked in the mirror. Her reflection told the truth. Pale skin, damp eyes, a girl fighting exhaustion. She forced her lips into something resembling a smile. It didn't feel real, but it would have to do. Customers didn't tip sadness. When she stepped back onto the restaurant floor, the rhythm of the diner pulled her in, orders being shouted, plates sliding across counters, voices layered one over the other. Emily moved between tables, quiet, careful, like a shadow among the chaos. Her hands steadied, though her heart hadn't, and in the corner, he was still there. The suited man. Same table, same untouched meal. His eyes followed her, sharp but unreadable. To others, he might have seemed like just another wealthy diner with time to waste. But to Emily, his gaze was something different. Heavy. Watchful. Almost protective. She avoided looking too long, afraid of what it meant. Yet every time she lifted her head, she caught him there, waiting. Dalton brushed past her, muttering under his breath, "Don't mess up again." His cologne was sharp, suffocating. Emily clenched her jaw but stayed silent. She needed the shift. She needed the paycheck. Pride couldn't pay rent. Still, somewhere deep inside her, a quiet defiance flickered. A tiny flame against the storm, and in the corner, the stranger saw it. His hand tapped once against the wine glass, deliberate, patient, as if he knew the story wasn't finished, as if he was waiting for the moment to step out of the shadows. The weight of Emily's struggle was invisible to everyone else in the room, but not to him, not anymore. The dinner rush had reached its peak. Plates clattered, waitresses weaved through tight spaces, and the smell of grilled steaks filled the air. But under the noise was a tension thick enough to taste. Emily had just set down a tray of drinks when Dalton's voice pierced the room. "Again?" he barked, slamming a receipt against the counter. His words cut through the noise like a blade. "Do you even know how to do your job?" The restaurant froze. A family of 4 stopped mid-bite. The busboy stood frozen with dirty plates in his hands. Emily's face went pale, her hands trembling as the receipt fluttered to the floor. "I'm sorry, sir," she whispered, her throat tight. Dalton sneered louder this time, his tone carrying across every booth. "Sorry doesn't fix incompetence. If you can't keep up, maybe you don't belong here." The silence that followed was heavy. Customers shifted uncomfortably, but no one intervened. Everyone knew the unwritten rule: don't get involved. Emily's eyes welled, her body shaking. And then, the sound of a chair sliding back. Slow. Deliberate. The suited man in the corner stood. His presence alone commanded the room. The navy jacket fit his broad frame perfectly, his shoes polished, his watch glinting beneath the soft light. But it wasn't his clothes that silenced the room. It was his face. Recognition rippled across the diners like a wave. Whispers started. "That's Victor Marino." "No, it can't be." "It is." The name carried weight. Billionaire investor. Rumored ties to families that once ruled Chicago's underworld. A man people spoke about in hushed tones but never to his face. Victor's voice was calm, almost quiet, yet it carried farther than Dalton's shouting ever could. "Is this how you speak to your employees?" Dalton froze, color draining from his face. "Sir, Victor raised a hand, silencing him. His gaze cut like steel. "No excuses. I watched this young woman work. She's exhausted, underpaid, and still trying to serve with dignity. And you humiliate her in front of strangers to feel powerful?" No one moved. No one breathed. Victor's words dropped like stones into still water. "Power isn't yelling at the powerless. It's how you treat those who depend on you." Emily's lips parted slightly, stunned. She hadn't expected anyone, let alone him, to defend her. Dalton stammered, sweat beating at his temples. I didn't mean—" Victor stepped closer, towering over him. "You didn't mean to get caught. There's a difference." The restaurant was silent, every eye locked on the unfolding scene. The balance of power had shifted completely. Emily stood frozen, her hands still trembling. But this time it wasn't from fear. It was from the shock of being seen, truly seen, for the first time. Dalton's face was ghost white, his arrogant smirk gone. His lips moved but no words formed. For the first time, the man who barked orders and insults like second nature stood speechless. Victor Marino leaned closer, his voice low, steady, carrying the kind of authority that couldn't be faked. "Dignity," he said, "isn't a privilege you hand out. It's a right every human being deserves." The words hung in the air, heavy, undeniable. Dalton swallowed hard, nodding quickly. But Victor wasn't done. He pulled out his wallet, setting down a thick envelope of bills on the table. "For the waitress," he said, his gaze never leaving Dalton. "And make sure it goes where it's meant to." Gasps rippled through the restaurant. Emily stood frozen, her tray still clutched in her shaking hands. She couldn't remember the last time someone defended her, let alone gave her more than a dismissive glance. Victor turned, pulling a business card from his pocket. He placed it gently in Emily's hand. "For your mother's care, call this number. They'll take it from here." Her breath caught. Her eyes darted from the card to his face, searching for a trace of mockery, but there was none. "Only resolve," Dalton stammered. "Sir, Victor cut him off with a stare colder than steel. You'll apologize. Dalton turned toward Emily, his voice trembling. I'm sorry. The apology sounded forced, but it was more than Emily ever thought she'd hear. She gave a small nod, not for him, but for herself. Victor adjusted his cufflinks, straightened his jacket, and finally, picked up his untouched glass of wine. He set it back down without drinking, the gesture deliberate, symbolic. Then he turned toward the door. Every eye followed him as he walked out. Customers who had once buried themselves in menus now sat frozen, caught in the wake of something they couldn't quite explain. Emily stood rooted in place, the card still in her trembling hand. She whispered softly, almost to herself, "Thank you." No one replied. The words weren't meant for anyone in the room. They were meant for him, and maybe for the universe itself. She looked down at the business card again. For the first time in a long time, the weight pressing on her chest felt lighter. Not because of money, not because of promises, but because someone with all the power in the world had chosen to see her. Not as a mistake, not as people like you, but as human. The restaurant eventually stirred back to life. Forks clinking, conversations resuming, but nothing felt the same. Something invisible had shifted. Emily tucked the card close to her heart, her eyes glistening.